I'm going to talk mostly about the work that we do with Jesse's team that's around the ecological services team approach and workload. And that's doing a lot in terms of sort of planning for the natural areas work and natural resource work.
And hi, everybody. I'm Cary Hobbs. I'm the Natural Area Operations Supervisor for Parks and Open Space. I've been with Parks and Open Space for 25 years, crazily enough. But my staff are responsible for kind of the on-the-ground maintenance activities related to our 5,400 plus acres of natural area space. Is that right? 4,400, sorry. 4,400.
A lot.
This is a lot. I the number escapes me at times. But anyway, we're excited to give this presentation to you, and I think Shelly's going to get started here.
Yep, I can share my screen. So as we've both mentioned, we'll pause here on the next picture, and we're going to talk about sort of nature and people and how we are approaching natural areas management. Let's see. Okay. I do want to pause for a moment and acknowledge that we live and work on the traditional homelands of the Kalapuya people. Kalapuyans lived on and stewarded this land for thousands of years and continue to live here and make valuable contributions in our communities. And the descendants of the Kalapuya may be members of the Confederated Tribes of the Siletz, the Confederated Tribes of the Grand Ronde, the Confederated Tribes of the Warm Springs. And we acknowledge that we are on occupied lands and express our respect for the Kalapuya and all tribal nations of Oregon and the important contributions they continue to make. Jesse and I are going to do kind of a tag team presentation here today, and we're going to talk a little bit about the what and how of the work that we do, giving you a little introduction to the system and how we're structured, and then getting into a little bit of the why with the drivers of our work and give you a little bit of detail of the current projects that we're working on and are excited about. Jesse gave you a little bit of preview of this, some statistics around our natural areas within the park system. There's about 4,400 acres representing a variety of different habitat types. And those are distributed across 90 parks. And those parks may not be solely managed as natural area parks. There's some parks that have sort of a combination of natural area and developed park. And we manage over 30 miles of waterways, which can include sort of a more engineered channel that's sort of channelized, maybe you might call it a ditch or a stream, and also more natural creeks and rivers. And then we also manage 60 miles of, or about 60 miles of roadside ditches. And we do that with an annual budget for FY21. We've had $3.7 million. And if you think about that in terms of the acreage, not including all the miles of roadside ditches, it's about $840 per acre. Jesse, were you going to talk about?
Oh yeah, thank you. My team is natural area operations. You can see there, we're part of the park operations section. My team has a budget of about $2.5 million. That's 12 full-time staff. Over half of our budget is from the city's stormwater fund. And so a lot of the work we're doing is related to waterways, but also recognizing all of the watershed impacts that this work has in protecting water quality in Eugene, Springfield area. The remaining part of our funding is general fund, park and open space levy, which is relatively new, and a little bit of road fund contributions.
And then my team is within the park and natural resource planning section. We're funded at about $1.2 million. It's 5 full-time employees. And we're about 60% stormwater funded. The remaining funding comes through our wetland mitigation bank, grant and capital funding, and a small amount of levy funding. And just as an example, for grant funding in FY21, we brought in about $300,000 in grant and other external funding to support the work on both of our teams, really, and just in terms of overall management of our natural areas. And so what does our natural area program do? In general, we have a mission to maintain functioning natural systems for multiple benefits. And we do that through some basic land stewardship activities, which can include things like maintaining fence lines, gates, trailheads, and then also a lot of vegetation and habitat management, which can be around sort of hazard trees and hazardous vegetation, as well as things to support habitat, and as the second bullet gets to support natural processes that promote healthy ecosystems, clean air and water, things like supporting pollinators and rare plants, carbon sequestration, all of those sorts of things. And we're doing all of that kind of within this matrix of a very urban setting, or fairly urban setting as a small city, the small city that Eugene is. So in that context, we have to think more than maybe some of our natural area partners might, like people like the Forest Service or BLM in some cases, in terms of thinking about flooding, street flooding, fire. We are all thinking about climate change for sure. And then the role of disease and pests and introduced species, which may come from those interactions in a more urban matrix with more humans transporting things around. And then last but not least, thinking of certainly wanting to provide opportunities for people to connect with nature, and whether that's in a more active sense with recreation on trails, people hiking, walking, biking, doing water recreation on the river, or just the benefit of just being in nature. There's a lot of scientific evidence that just being outside really supports both physical and mental health. And the drivers of the work, so thinking about the why, we've already kind of gotten to some of that on the previous slide, but other things that we certainly take into consideration when we're considering what to do in our natural areas. One of those things are permit requirements. We've mentioned stormwater funding that we get, and we have, like a lot of municipalities, MS4 permit for stormwater discharge. And there are some things related to that permit and also to our comprehensive stormwater management plan that tie directly to the work that we do. We may have other regulatory requirements related to threatened or endangered species, wetland regulations, migratory bird restrictions, things like that, that kind of either put sideboards on what we do or help drive what we do. Public safety, again, thinking about hazardous trees, safety on trails, and then even from a larger community standpoint in terms of flooding and fire. I already talked a bit about resource protection and enhancement and the things we're doing there to help restore or maintain habitat for rare species, or just to promote healthy forests and wetlands and waterways, providing compatible public access and use. And then thinking about parks a lot, both natural areas and developed parks are used frequently for sort of an outdoor classroom for a variety of groups. So thinking about the education benefits of our park system. We have a volunteer program that helps build community in terms of bringing people together to work in parks, or just having parks as places for people to gather And then public relations, and I'm put that here to think also about, we do get input and concerns from the public, and we definitely consider that in considering what we're doing in our work. And we do bring in public comments in some of our planning efforts to figure out what people are looking for in parks. And then I'll skip the service provisioning, but that's a lot of the same thing around water quality, air quality, pollination services, things like that, carbon sequestration. And then we have a lot of plans, policies, and partnerships that we're part of, or that help influence the work that we do. One of those is the Parks and Rec System Plan. This was approved by council in 2018 after a few years of hard work from folks in both Parks and Open Space and Recreation. For folks not from Eugene, Parks and Open Space is under the umbrella of Public Works, but our Recreation Department is in another department, which is Library, Recreation, and Cultural Services. So it's a little different from a lot of our colleagues in the parks realm, but that's how we're structured. But we worked together on this system plan because that makes sense from a thematic point of view and just from the view of the community. So that plan was approved in 2018. It provides really a 30-year vision for both parks and recreation, thinking about rec centers, pools, trails, parkland, playgrounds, a very comprehensive look at where we want to be moving towards 30 years. And the work that went into that helped define what we asked for in terms of a bond and levy measures in 2018, which were approved by our Eugene voters to help support this work. I mentioned stormwater and the comprehensive stormwater management plan, affectionately known as CSWAMP from a lot of people in our organization. And so there are several goals that have aspects that are very directly influence the work that we do in natural areas. Looking at goal 1 and the interconnected system of constructed and natural facilities, providing multiple stormwater benefits, protecting life and property from flood and drainage hazards, providing a safe and healthy environment for humans and plants and animals, managing the ongoing maintenance of the public waterway system, and then educating, informing, and organizing citizens about stormwater issues. And then looking a little more externally, we're strongly involved or heavily involved with the Rivers to Ridges partnership. And this partnership grew out of West Eugene Wetlands partnership, of which the city was a foundational member. And in 2003, a more comprehensive or broader vision was adopted, the Rivers to Ridges vision, which sort of cemented this larger partnership. And we've now grown to 19 federal, state, and local government agencies and NGOs, non-governmental organizations. Those include groups like all 4 of the local watershed councils, McKenzie River Trust, the Nature Conservancy, and recently Willamette River Keepers also joined the partnership. So it's a really great group of folks to be working with, and we've made a lot of accomplishments in 15 years. This screenshot on the right is from a brochure that you can access at the website, but it demonstrates some of the accomplishments around land protection and acres restored, stream miles opened, plants that are planted, and paths and trails that were built. And really the vision, to sum it up, the main part of the vision is just creating this connected system of habitats and trails in this sort of metro area around Eugene and Springfield. And so I know this is a busy map. I just want to point out this is the purple polygons on here. So let's see if I can get my pointer over here. So like this. In this area, those are showing parcels of land that were protected since 2003. And so you can see there's a lot of acreage. It's now in 2020, it was about 7,000 acres. And the city in 2020 purchased Black Oak Basin, which is one of our newest parks. It forms a pivotal connection between some other parks and this idea of a connected system along the ridgeline and in South Eugene there. And we were able to purchase that property in part through a grant from the Willamette Wildlife Mitigation Program. We received $1.2 million for both purchase of that property and stewardship actions afterwards.
All right, I'm going to step in here and talk a little bit about some of the, Shelly and I are going to continue to tag team here, but we're going to talk about kind of components of our programs in relationship to four key areas that we manage in the park system. Ridgeline there in the upper left, waterways, lower left, wetland resource areas in the upper right, and then neighborhood natural areas in the lower right. And I'll be talking a little, we'll be both talking about a little bit more of those areas here coming up. Next slide, Shelly. So ridgeline area, this is a shot from the top of Spencer Butte, which is, one of the crown jewels of Eugene's park system. We have worked very hard to grow this system over the last 15, 20 years. And we have a vision of connecting the ridgeline system between Mount Pisgah in Springfield and Fern Ridge Reservoir in West Eugene. And we've gone a long ways. We really only have a few kind of major key parcels left to purchase, but we're very proud of that work. Next slide, Shelly. Eugene has a long history of utilizing trails. The upper picture here is a picture of a class from the U of O who is up on the summit of Spencer Butte. Looks to me like in the 20s or something. It still remarkably looks like that today. Maybe not quite as much vegetation at the summit, but it's still a very treasured place in our community. We now have a variety of trails throughout Eugene Springfield, from hiking trails to mountain bike trails to running trails as part of Tracktown USA. And we're doing work in the ridgeline system and throughout the community to enhance trails as part of the work we do in Parks and Open Space. Next slide, Shelly. We actually have 44 miles of unpaved trail currently in Eugene Parks. The levee, recent levee has enabled us to increase our trail maintenance significantly. Last year, we resurfaced about 5 miles of trail. This is kind of major trail renovation type work. We have a seasonal trail crew that works for us for about 3 months a year, doing kind of technical fixes. And we're also doing minor trail construction, kind of small trails that help connect parts of the park system together. All while also looking to our bond to build additional trails in the ridgeline system and beyond. Go ahead.
I'm going to jump in here then and talk about fuels reduction projects. So this is primarily in the ridgeline, though we do this work in a few other smaller neighborhood parks. Skinner Butte is one of them, which is pictured in the photos on the left-hand side. And what this relates to, I think probably everyone on this call is familiar with the increase in wildfires that we're seeing across the Western United States, but certainly here in Western Oregon as well. And many of our natural area parks are located in what's called the wildland urban interface, or the WUI. And I think, again, in Western Oregon, we're becoming a little more familiar with that term. And we feel like parks can really play a meaningful role in mitigating wildfire risk and help to protect neighbors, businesses, and critical infrastructure. a lot of our ridgeline parks, when we purchased them, were pretty overgrown. They were maybe formerly logged, and so had just a dense thickets of shrubs and invasive blackberry and Scotch broom, and were fairly hazardous from that regard. And so we can do some targeted vegetation removal to meet, again, this is kind of a theme of our talk, but multiple objectives. So trying to create a more fire resilient landscape, provide for habitat restoration. A lot of our rarest habitats in the Willamette Valley are oak and prairie habitats, which are more open traditionally, and had the indigenous people used fire to maintain those systems and to manage those systems. And so they're really adapted to fire and can create this fire resilient landscape that we're talking about. So when we do this vegetation removal, we are concurrently helping to restore some native habitats. And then we're also providing for access. So access not only for the public for things like trails and recreation, but also for our fire department. And we work pretty closely with our fire department on these issues. So thinking about if a fire would break out, are these areas accessible for our fire department to get in, or Lane County Fire or whoever would need to come in and treat it before it hopefully became a catastrophic wildfire. So this is the pictures on the left are showing Skinner Butte. The upper picture is before and after. At the bottom, it's the same place, looks very different. And about probably 90% or more of what was removed were either invasive non-native species or dead vegetation. And it just looks much different up there now. In terms of funding that work, we started the work back in 2007. Some of that was in-house work, but really lately in the last 5, 6, 7 years, it's really ramped up in part because of these, I think, a benefit of the partnerships that we have that have grown out of the West Eugene Wetlands and Rivers to Ridges partnerships. We've received, as you can see there, $1.3 million in external funding. A lot of that's been from the Bureau of Land Management through their community wildfire assistance funding. And we just are really grateful for that partnership and the funding that's come from that. You can see the map on the right is in orange are the parks, which are 12. There's 12 parks where we've done some of this work. And we've done this work in those 12 parks on 750 acres where we've just tried to create this balanced approach for fuels reduction and habitat restoration. And another aspect of this in terms of fuels reduction and fire is controlled ecological burns. I'm going to talk a little bit about the burning we've done mostly in the wetlands for the last 35 years for multiple purposes, but we're excited about working with our fire department and other partners on maybe deploying ecological burns in the ridgeline as well to help with fuels reduction and public safety.
Okay, so we're going to talk about waterways a bit next. This is a lovely shot from Delta Ponds looking towards Spencer Butte. Our teams collectively manage, as we said before, 30 miles of open waterways and 60 miles of roadside ditches. So got a lot to cover. We have 3 people who are dedicated to that work throughout the city, and it's a full-time job. We also have a restoration ecologist who spends much of her time helping out with habitat management issues in waterways. Go ahead. So this is interesting. This is a shot of the upper Amazon Creek in, you can see on the left-hand side is 1986. The right-hand side is 2014. So this really shows a snapshot of kind of a change in the way that we think about vegetation and its role in waterways. there was a time when, you know, the primary activity for public works staff was to go and kind of scrape the banks of these waterways to keep them flowing very efficiently. And you know, that was really the primary concern of the day, was managing flooding in these places. Over the years, you know, in part due to regulations that are really looking at maintaining waterways for water quality as well, we began changing the way we maintain these waterways. And this is what, well, a big portion of what my staff does is to do kind of moving to more manual management of vegetation to maintain shading and habitat. So you can see, you know, on the right-hand side, really thinking about managing for multiple objectives around water temperature and, you know, the amount of, you know, again, wildlife habitat and you know, other pollutants and that sort of thing, and having more vegetative contact for water with the adjacent vegetation. Go ahead, Shelly. This is a work that my team does every summer. We hire a couple of seasonals, and our waterways staff basically walk about 20 miles usually per year of our engineered waterways in town, and we do this thing we call green piping. And what they're doing is they're basically creating a green pipe by maintaining a conveyance area in the center of the waterway, pruning up willows and trees so that the canopy height is taller, but you know, the roots of these trees and shrubs are anchoring the soil in the bank and preventing sloughing and erosion. They're also helping to slow the water down a bit as it passes through, and providing shading to the water for water quality. So you can see another portion of this is actually actively planting willows and dogwoods and other trees, both you know, trees at the top of the bank and willows and dogwoods kind of on the mid slope for shading and habitat. So we're pretty excited about this. It's been kind of a groundbreaking piece of what we do, and it's working. You know, we monitor the waterways during flood events to see, you know, what's happening with them, so we can ensure that we're doing a good job, and we're really seeing that we're able to find that right balance so far. So I'm very excited about that work. Go ahead, Shelly. Habitat enhancement work in waterways. This is a collaboration between Shelly's staff and my staff. Putting out turtle basking logs is one of the things we can do to improve kind of protected basking habitat for western pond turtles in our system. We have a number of ponds, and we're also planting aquatic plants along, you know, in the water for places for the turtles to shelter, and we're providing nest protection in certain areas, and we're doing that work in conjunction with Oregon Department of Fish and Wildlife and volunteers, and we are going out and actively you know, finding western pond turtle nests and so on and so forth. I don't know, Shelly, I don't remember how many we found this is the most recent year, but it's pretty exciting. We probably should have included a baby turtle picture, Shelly, but
there was one earlier, but yeah.
Yeah. Definitely something we're proud of. Go ahead.
Yeah, so another project that we're excited about and are working with our colleagues in Public Works Engineering on. And again, this is another project that has multiple funding sources. So stormwater capital and bond funding, parks bond funding. And then we're also applying for a grant. So we're really trying to leverage funding in the work that we do on these capital projects. And so this needs probably a little bit of explanation. This picture on in the top here, the photo, is showing the concrete channel as it currently is. You can see it's very steep walled. There's no connection of the water to the floodplain. This stream used to, like many streams in the Willamette Valley, be more of a meandering kind of matrix of wetlands, probably forested wetlands, wet prairies, and stream channels. And as Euro-Americans came in and we settled, we tended to channelize streams and just put them back into a channel that was more conducive to development around them rather than meandering across the floodplain. And so while we have some constraints here in terms of how much we can reconnect the Amazon Creek with the floodplain, because we do have a road to the west and a park and bike path and school and development, like all around it. We are attempting to what we're calling sort of rewild this first section of concrete channel. So from 24th Street north to 20th Street, we're going to be taking out the channel. Let me see if I can get there. So this is showing the walls of the channel, and our engineering colleagues and consultants are working with the design work in terms of taking those out, laying back the banks. So this becomes the top of bank here and here. And we have a little more natural meandering stream, adding vegetation and trees in there to help stabilize that and shade the water, and just kind of return it a little bit more to a natural system and improve the water quality and habitat there. And it's a really exciting project for us. I'm going to transition now and talk a little bit about wetlands. And so, as I mentioned, wet prairie and oak and upland prairie were a really dominant habitat type in the Willamette Valley, and riparian forests as well, until you get up into the more Doug fir forest. And so in our neck of the woods here in Eugene and Springfield and throughout the lower elevations of the Willamette Valley, we now have maybe 5 to 10% or less of this habitat remaining. And wetlands were a really important source of, or really power horses in terms of thinking about ecosystem services and the services they provide in terms of helping to hold back and filter water, attenuating floods. So rather than having them creeks be super flashy, water is able to spread out and more slowly infiltrate and then be released out. We get groundwater recharge in wetlands, carbon sequestration in high functioning wetlands, and then pollinator services through the biodiversity in terms of the plants that are available. And you may have heard a lot about bees being in decline, and wetlands can really help in terms of providing some diversity of flower resources and nectar sources for pollinators. In terms of how we maintain and try to enhance the wetlands that we do have in our inventory, we have a goal around maintaining that hydrology, or the how the water acts on the land. So is it just being shunted off? Is it being held back? What's happening there? That's what we think about with the hydrology. Are we seeing any erosion? Trying to control for that. We try to control for prairie structure, or maintain a prairie structure, which is this more open habitat with less woody vegetation. And then to some degree also increasing or maintaining the biodiversity that's out there. One of the tools we use is prescribed fire, which I mentioned earlier. We also sometimes call it ecological fire or ecological burning. And as I mentioned, the ecosystem is fire adapted from the thousands of years that it was managed with fire. And so some of these plants really thrive only with fire on the landscape. We work with partners in our Rivers to Ridges partnership to implement prescribed fire, and do so, as the name implies, under a really strict prescription in terms of the environmental impacts the day of a burn, and many other things go into planning that out. We also work with our local air quality agency, LRAPA. We need to get a permit, so there's really a lot of structure and sideboards around that. But it's kind of an exciting part of one of the exciting tools that we have to use, particularly in wetlands. When we don't burn, we use mowing as a way to introduce that disturbance into that ecosystem. And we have a native plant materials program that collects seeds. We have a couple seasonals that come on, collect seeds from some of mostly wetland areas. And then we grow those out either in our own native plant nursery or through contracts, and then distribute those grown out seeds to either burned areas to help restore more diversity, or in other restoration projects. I also want to talk a little bit about our wetland mitigation program. It's last year celebrating its 25th anniversary. To date, we've used this mechanism to help restore over 300 acres of wetlands in our inventory. This is a program that has some sideboards and is regulated by the Department of State Lands and the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers. It helps support local sustainable development. We currently have one active bank, Coyote Prairie North, and are starting a new bank called Amazon Prairie. And we're in the midst, again, with our partners in Public Works Engineering, developing plans for that and working through the permits and all of that work to start our first phase this summer. So that's exciting. And the proceeds from selling our mitigation credits for permitted projects. So we do sell to other government entities. We use it internally, and we also sell on the private market. And so those funds are then used to support 1.15 FTE of my staff, and then also provide program support to keep the program sustainable, to buy a new land and restore that, and also to maintain those properties outside our UGB that are part of this program, or outside of city limits.
All right, so the last kind of major area of land that we're managing in Eugene's park system are we call neighborhood natural areas. And we call them neighborhood natural areas because they are kind of this scattered natural area parks or portions of parks that exist throughout our park system, but are not part of one of those other three kind of major land types that we talked about, the ridgeline, waterways, and wetlands. These sites can potentially contain some of those habitats as well. Sometimes they are also future developed park sites that are kind of going to be at some point developed as a kind of traditional park area with irrigated grass and playgrounds and that sort of thing. Other times they're kind of on the edge of one of those parks, like this picture you see here, which is at Oakmont Park in Eugene, and there's a playground just behind where this picture was taken, and some traditional park amenities and a natural area component to it as well. Other sites are quite large. We have Skinner Butte itself, the Butte right near downtown Eugene is a neighborhood natural area site. The Wheelamute Natural Area could be considered a neighborhood natural area. So we have lots of sites that are both big and small that fit in this category. It's a little bit hard to figure out where they fit sometimes, but we're dedicated to maintaining them. And frankly, because they're in people's backyards, the issues related to their management are oftentimes more complex. We really need to do a good job of stewarding these places for the issues of them being right next to people's houses oftentimes. Go ahead, Shelly. So I'm talking about a few kind of exciting things that my staff do. I put exclamation points next to them because they're exciting to me. They're probably not as exciting to most people, but Mowing is a super important part of what we do. Those tractor mower you see here is mowing. We have two staff who basically are mowing in those things from April to October, about 600 acres of parkland. Most sites are mowed about 3 times, but some of our prairie sites are only mowed once. And so we're mowing for things like public safety, so fire breaks, vision clearance zones at intersections, that sort of thing. Recreation, some sites of our neighborhood natural area sites or future developed park sites function in their neighborhoods to be used as kind of semi-active park space, places where people may throw the frisbee or sit in the grass or that sort of thing. So mowing them more often is a bit more important. And then for habitat, part of maintaining these prairies in an urban context in some locations with the absence of fire means mowing them at least once a year to keep woody vegetation from taking over some of our native wetland prairies or other prairie sites. This area right here is being carefully timed because we have western pond turtles that actually bask in the area nearby. So they're mowing during a certain window to try to protect western pond turtle habitat, but maintain open ground for them to nest. Next. Fence lines, bread and butter stuff. This is, you gotta whack down the blackberries along people's fence lines. And this is a big part of what we do. We have seasonal crew that goes out and does this work throughout the park system during the summer. They're also doing things like, cleaning signs and, dealing with hazards that might exist in the park or that sort of thing. Next slide. And then trash cans, right? This is the bread and butter of park maintenance. We have through the levy been able to increase trash service at our trailheads and then other kind of key natural area locations. And this is an important part of our service delivery that we have places for giving people a chance to throw away their trash and keep our parks clean. Go ahead, Shelly. The last piece is habitat, and we're also engaged in a lot of habitat restoration in these spaces. Delphinium on the left, Oregon fauna lilies on the right. We have these wonderful native endemic species throughout our park system, and protecting these really special spaces from invasive weeds and impacts, recreational impacts and those sort of things through careful mowing, through invasive species management and general kind of protection of these spaces is a super important part of what we're doing out there. Shelly and my team both are engaged in this work. And then I would be remiss without talking a little bit about illicit activities. This is an important part of unfortunately, an important part of our work too. Our natural area system in Eugene is large and we have some wonderful spaces and we have a lot of houseless people in our community. And it's a really difficult situation for us. We now have a levy-funded team of 2 people plus seasonal staff who do nothing but pick up garbage and deal with graffiti and help remove camps from places where we can't have them in the park system. Next slide. This is a big camp cleanup that happened on the north bank of the Willamette here in the last year after the city worked out a deal with ODOT to take over a piece of land that was previously ODOT property and so we could help protect it. So this was a big cleanup following that, the acquisition of this site as parkland. Go ahead, Shelly. And then graffiti abatement's another part that we're doing out there in the park system to create a safe and welcoming park. Again, these are just, these things are out there in our system, and part of managing this land isn't just the birds and the bees and the trails, it's also dealing with impacts to these sites and making sure that we protect these areas and that we make them safe.
Um, I'm going to talk a little bit about our volunteer program, which neither Jesse nor I manage, but they're an important part of our park system and our parks organization. And I think is maybe a little different from other public works services, that there's maybe not as much of an opportunity for volunteers to get involved, but in parks, they can really provide some meaningful work across the system in both developed parks and natural areas. And it also provides an opportunity for education and outreach to members of the public. And you can see in the white box there from 2020, the number of hours, and that was probably low from what it could have been given the pandemic and some of the restrictions on work parties and things like that, but they're really an important part of our system. And so I should mention that they're not managed by us, but we have a community engagement section that includes our volunteer coordinators. And one of the things they do is they work with us to manage either individual volunteers who go out and do projects, or sometimes there's work parties. Like this is a picture here from a work party in Delta Ponds, where this has been a great success story in terms of being able to control an invasive weed called Ludwigia, which is really a habitat altering invasive species that can just cause a lot of environmental damage. And so we, first would start out with grants and then pretty significant amount of work with contractors. We're now still using contractors, but also doing some of the work in-house, and with volunteers, we've been able to eradicate about 90% from this site, and the same from Golden Gardens as well. So a real success story there. And then we also have some groups that go out and are pretty self-sufficient. We sometimes provide some materials for them, but the Willamette River Keepers is one of those. They're a great partner and do a lot of great work along the Willamette River. And this is a picture from an annual Great Willamette River cleanup that they have been part of, just picking up garbage. And they now have started up again what they call Trashy Tuesdays, where there's a group of people that go out every Tuesday and float the river and collect trash. So that's near the end of our presentation. I think Jesse and I wanted to talk a little bit about just some of the things that we're excited about that are coming up in the next probably several years or more, but more on the horizon. One of those for both of us, I think, is the Willamette River access and recreation, and just thinking about ways that we can help people safely get to and recreate in the river. We have a great path system that goes along the river, but there's not a lot of great opportunities to get down to the Willamette River. So we're excited about that. And then I mentioned earlier Black Oak Basin, which is a new property for us. And we have two other neighboring properties, connected properties, Coryell Ridge and Moon Mountain. And we're pretty excited about thinking about trail options there. There's some really beautiful views and landscapes and habitats to see up there, and just opportunities for, again, recreation close to home.
And then, many of you are probably familiar with Delta Ponds, and we showed some pictures from it. The city worked with the Corps of Engineers to do this massive restoration project of a, former gravel extraction area, and that turned into ponds over time, and have done a ton of habitat restoration and recreational improvements there. For many years, we have had a kind of a main piece of trail in the central portion of the site, which has basically a gap in it, and you can go down one way to the end, you can go down the other way to the end, but there's no loop there, and it basically is looping around the largest portion of the pond complex. And we're very excited that we were able to, through the bond and with some additional funding help, grant funding help, be able to fund the completion of this loop trail project. The other big thing coming up for us is Suzanne Arley Park, which is a 530 acre parcel. It's actually Eugene's largest single park at this point, but which is largely hard to get to at this point. And we're going to be, through the bond, extending the Ridgeline Trail to the east, nearly to I-5, all the way to LCC. And we're going to be doing that starting in about a year and a half, starting the planning for that work. So very exciting that we're going to be extending the Ridgeline Trail. We'll also be expanding mountain biking opportunities in Eugene through that project over time. So we're very excited about that work.
And that's all we have. Do you want to, I know we probably went a little over, but want to see if there's any questions or comments people have. I'll leave this up for a minute and then maybe I'll stop sharing my screen in case people want to contact us afterwards.
Yeah, thank you, Shelly and Jesse. That's a lot of work, So I don't see any questions in the Q&A box, but I do remind attendees that if you do have a question, go ahead and put it in the Q&A. Doug Singer says, Eugene Pose, POS, Parks and Open Space, rocks. So good job there. I do see that Elizabeth Papadopoulos has her hand up. Elizabeth, did you have a question or want to talk? Oh, her hand just went down. So I guess that's enough. But yeah, thank you for the great presentation. I'm going to give folks people a chance here. More kudos for the great work that you're doing in your program. So thank you there. But yeah, and just to remind attendees too, that if you're interested in next week's presentation or putting forward a presentation for our fall conference, go to the Oregon APWA chapter webpage. And you can find links to be able to submit presentations or register for next week's session. I don't see any questions. But you did put your contact information up on the screen there for a little bit, and yeah, invite people to reach out and contact you with questions. I will say that Eugene is known for being willing to share information, also because we get lots of ideas when we share information from other folks. And I think that probably most of what is done in Eugene is because we've gotten ideas from seeing how other people do things, and we run with it. So yeah, I still am not seeing any questions. So thank you everybody for joining us. I mean, we still do have a few minutes, so I'm not going to like just force everybody out. But yeah, any other thoughts, comments?
It was really fun chatting with you guys. Fun to share our work. It was a great excuse for Shelly and I to kind of, think about, these things are always great for thinking about the work you do and being able to explain to people. So I appreciate the opportunity.
Well, thank you again for joining us. It looks like we just have lots of kudos and thanks for the presentation. And so I'll let you all have a few more minutes to get ready for whatever 1 o'clock meetings or work that you have left to go on. So thank you everybody for joining us. And I hope to see some of you next week.
Thank you, Jennifer. Thanks, everyone.
All right. Thank you.
Bye.
Bye.